The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Priya Kumar started her journey to the airport. She'd spent the last 3 hours navigating through heavy traffic, determined not to miss her flight. This wasn't just any trip. Her younger sister was getting married in Singapore tomorrow, and she couldn't bear the thought of missing it. Running her fingers through her messy hair, Priya wheeled her suitcase towards International Airways check-in counter. The airport was buzzing with its usual morning chaos, children crying, announcements echoing through the halls, and travelers rushing to their gates. She checked her phone. 6:45 a.m. There was still plenty of time before her 9:30 a.m. flight. At counter number 7, a middle-aged woman named Rita Thompson sat with dark circles under her eyes, clearly having a rough morning. The computer system had crashed 3 times already, and she'd dealt with countless angry passengers. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, and her patience was wearing thinner by the minute. "Good morning," Priya said with a gentle smile, sliding her passport and booking confirmation across the counter. She noticed Rita's hand trembling slightly as she reached for the documents. "Your passport looks worn," Rita muttered, flipping through the pages with unnecessary force. The passport, while not brand new, was perfectly valid for another 4 years. Priya had used it just 2 months ago for a business trip to Japan without any issues. "Is everything okay?" Priya asked, noticing Rita's increasingly agitated expression. The agent's fingers were now gripping the passport so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Rita's face contorted with frustration, and without warning, she gripped both sides of the passport's photo page. The sound of tearing paper cut through the ambient airport noise like a knife. Priya's heart stopped as she watched her primary travel document being destroyed right before her eyes. "This passport is too damaged to be accepted," Rita announced coldly, as if she hadn't just been the one to damage it. "Next passenger, please." Priya stood frozen, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. Did you just tear my passport?" Her voice quivered, barely above a whisper. The reality of what had just happened was slowly sinking in. That was a valid government document. You can't just. Other passengers in line began murmuring, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding situation. An elderly gentleman behind Priya stepped forward. "I saw everything," he said firmly. "She deliberately tore that passport. I'll be happy to serve as a witness." A young woman 2 spots back in line was already on her phone, describing what she'd just witnessed to someone. "You won't believe what I just saw at the airport. Yes, I'm recording it right now." Priya's hands shook as she tried to gather the pieces of her torn passport. Her sister's excited face flashed through her mind. They'd spent months planning every detail of the wedding. The thought of missing it made her stomach churn. "I need to speak to your supervisor," Priya managed to say, her voice stronger now despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "What you've done is completely unacceptable." Rita's response was to simply point at a sign behind her that read, "Management reserves the right to reject travel documents." She turned away, calling out, "Next in line," as if she hadn't just shattered someone's travel plans and violated federal law. But the other passengers weren't moving. Instead, they'd formed a supportive circle around Priya, many of them now on their phones, some calling the airline's customer service, others recording the incident, and a few even live-streaming the situation. "I've got the whole thing on video," a college student wearing headphones told Priya quietly. She clearly did it on purpose. "Don't worry, we're all witnesses." The tension in the air was palpable as more people gathered around, drawn by the commotion. Airport security officers began making their way toward the counter, their radios crackling with activity. Rita's face finally showed the first flicker of concern as she realized the gravity of what she'd just done. The morning sun continued to rise outside, but for Priya, it felt like the longest morning of her life. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a story that would soon capture the attention of millions and lead to changes in how airlines handle passenger documents. But for now, she stood at counter number 7, holding the pieces of her destroyed passport, surrounded by strangers who had become unexpected allies in her fight for justice. The next 30 minutes at the airport felt like an eternity for Priya. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from her sister Deepa in Singapore, but she couldn't bring herself to explain what had happened. How do you tell your sister that you might miss her wedding because an airline agent destroyed your passport? Airport security had arrived quickly, their presence drawing even more attention to counter number 7. Officer Rodriguez, a veteran of 15 years at the airport, took control of the situation with calm professionalism. "Ma'am, could you please step aside with me?" he asked Rita, who had suddenly become very interested in straightening the papers on her desk. The crowd of witnesses hadn't dispersed. If anything, it had grown larger. Ming Chen, the college student who had captured everything on video, was showing the footage to another security officer. "See? Right there, she deliberately tears it. There was nothing wrong with the passport before that." Priya sat on a nearby bench, her hands still trembling as she tried to piece together the torn passport. Next to her, an older woman named Mrs. Patel had taken charge of calling the Indian Embassy's emergency line. "Yes, this is regarding a destroyed passport." "No, it was deliberately damaged by an airline employee." "Yes, we have video evidence." The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. Priya's carefully planned schedule was falling apart. She had booked an early morning flight to have plenty of time to help with wedding preparations. Deepa had joked just yesterday about how Priya was always the organized one, the sister who never let anything go wrong. "Your sister's getting married tomorrow?" A gentle voice broke through her thoughts. Looking up, Priya saw a flight attendant named Jenny who had stopped to check on her. "I overheard what happened. Listen, I'm going to make some calls. We have protocols for emergencies like this." More airline staff had appeared, looking considerably more senior than Rita. A man in a crisp suit introduced himself as David Chen, the terminal manager. "I want to personally apologize for what happened," he began, his face grave. "We're taking the situation very seriously." Meanwhile, Rita's demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the cold indifference, replaced by growing panic as she realized the magnitude of her actions. Security cameras had captured everything, and passengers were still sharing their recordings in real time across social media platforms. "My daughter's graduation is next month in Australia," Priya explained to Mr. Chen, her voice cracking. "This passport had all my valid visas. The Singapore visa alone took weeks to process. The weight of everything she stood to lose was overwhelming." The college student, Ming, approached with his phone. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind, but I posted the video on TikTok. It's already got thousands of views. People are tagging the airline and demanding action." He showed her the screen, where comments were pouring in by the second. #JusticeForPassenger. "This is absolutely insane. She needs to be fired immediately. Book me on any airline but this one." The terminal manager's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations had somehow got wind of the story and were requesting statements. Rita had been escorted to a back office where she sat with union representatives, trying to explain her inexplicable actions. Mrs. Patel returned with news from the embassy. "They can issue an emergency passport, but it will take at least 24 hours. They're treating this as a priority case because of the circumstances." Priya finally gathered the courage to call her sister. As the phone rang, she stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner near a window. Outside, planes took off into the morning sky, each one a reminder of where she should have been heading. "Deepa, something happened," she began, her voice wavering. But before she could continue, Jenny, the flight attendant, rushed over, waving excitedly. "Wait, don't hang up," Jenny called out. "Mr. Chen just got off the phone with our regional director. They're arranging for special clearance with immigration in Singapore. They'll accept your torn passport along with police documentation of the incident. The airline will provide additional verification." A glimmer of hope broke through Priya's despair. The crowd of supporters around her broke into smiles and encouraging nods. Even the security officers looked pleased. "We're booking you on our next flight to Singapore, first class," Mr. Chen added, approaching with a stack of papers. "We'll need you to document everything that happened, but we can do that while we wait for the flight." For the first time since the incident began, Priya felt tears of relief instead of frustration. Her fellow passengers, who had become unexpected allies in this strange morning drama, began gathering their belongings, satisfied that justice was being served. As she followed Jenny to complete the necessary paperwork, Priya glanced back at counter number 7, now empty except for Rita's abandoned coffee cup. The morning's events would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Rita and the airline, but for how passengers' documents would be handled across the industry. But for now, there was a wedding to get to, and a story that would be told at family gatherings for years to come. By the time Pryor's replacement flight was preparing for boarding, her story had already taken on a life of its own across the internet. Ming's TikTok video had exploded, reaching over 2 million views in just 3 hours. The hashtag Passport Destroyer was trending nationwide, with people sharing their own customer service horror stories and demanding accountability. "You might want to see this," Jenny, the flight attendant, said, showing Pryor her phone during the pre-boarding wait. Major news websites had picked up the story, that headlines ranging from airline agents' shocking abuse of power to bride's sister's wedding dreams nearly shattered by torn passport. The airline's social media team was working overtime. Their official Twitter account had posted a statement. "We are aware of the incident at our check-in counter this morning. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not reflect our company values. We are taking immediate action and conducting a thorough investigation." Pryor's phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications. Her sister Deepa had shared the video in their family WhatsApp group, and now relatives from around the world were sending messages of support and outrage. Uncle Raj from London called to say he'd already filed a formal complaint with the airline's UK office. Cousin Anjali, a lawyer in New York, was drafting a letter demanding preservation of all evidence. In the first-class lounge, where the airline had escorted Pryor to wait for her flight, other passengers were discussing the incident in hushed tones. "Did you see how calm she stayed through the whole thing?" one businessman whispered to another. "I would have lost it completely." A group of travel bloggers had somehow gotten wind of the story and were live streaming updates to their followers. "This is exactly why we always tell you to record any confrontations with airline staff," one was saying. "You never know when you'll need evidence." Back at counter number 7, a new agent had taken over Reba's position. Someone had stuck a small post-it note on the counter that read, "Be kind to passengers," a photo that was already circulating on Instagram with thousands of likes. The terminal manager, Mr. Chen, approached Pryor with more updates. "The video has reached our CEO," he explained, looking both concerned and impressed. "He's personally called the Singapore Immigration Office to ensure you won't have any issues upon arrival." Meanwhile, in a small office near the airport's administrative section, Rita sat with human resources representatives, watching her actions play out on screens across social media. Her face had been blurred in most shares of the video, but her friends and family had started recognizing her anyway. Her teenage daughter had already texted, "Mom, please tell me that's not you in the passport video everyone's talking about." Airport staff had begun using the incident as an immediate teaching moment. During their shift change briefing, supervisors were showing the video and reminding employees about proper document handling procedures. "Remember," one supervisor said, "every passenger's documents represent their dreams, their plans, their families. We're here to help, not hinder." The story took another turn when someone discovered Rita's old social media posts complaining about her job. Screenshots of her previous rants about entitled passengers and people who don't understand airline policies were being shared alongside the passport video, creating a fuller picture of a customer service representative who had finally snapped. Pryor tried to stay above the growing social media frenzy. She focused instead on texting updates to Deepa about her new flight arrangements. But she couldn't help feeling a bit overwhelmed by how quickly everything had spread. "I just wanted to get to my sister's wedding," she told Jenny. "I never expected to become a viral sensation." Various advocacy groups had begun using the incident to push for better customer service regulations. A passengers' rights organization announced they would be using the video in their training materials. Even politicians were weighing in, with one local representative tweeting about the need for stronger protections for international travelers. As boarding time approached, Pryor received one final update from Mr. Chen. The airline's legal team had prepared a formal letter acknowledging the incident and accepting full responsibility. A document that would help smooth any potential immigration issues in Singapore. They had also arranged for a customer service representative to meet her at every connection point along her journey. "Your story is going to change things," Ming told her as she prepared to board. Sometimes it takes one incident to spotlight a bigger problem. He showed her his TikTok again. The view count had crossed 5 million, and the comments section was filled with people sharing how the video had made them rethink their own behavior in customer service situations. Looking back at the terminal as she walked toward her gate, Pryor could see people still gathered around counter number 7, taking photos and discussing the morning's events. What had started as a personal nightmare had transformed into a moment of public reckoning about power, accountability, and basic human decency in customer service. As she finally boarded her flight to Singapore, Pryor couldn't help but smile at the flight attendant's greeting. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. I promise your passport is safe with us." Sometimes, she realized, the worst moments can lead to the most meaningful changes. While Pryor was finally in the air heading to Singapore, the wheels of justice were turning back at International Airways headquarters. The morning's events had set off a chain reaction that nobody could have predicted, reaching all the way to the highest levels of airline management. In a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor, airline executives gathered for an emergency meeting. The company's reputation was taking a massive hit, with their stock price already dropping 3% since the market opened. Chief Executive Officer Robert Patel had cancelled all his meetings for the day, determined to handle this crisis personally. "Show me everything," he demanded, watching the viral video for what felt like the 100th time. "I want to know how this happened, and I want to know now." Down in the airport's security office, Officer Rodriguez and his team were reviewing footage from every angle. The security cameras had captured more than just the passport incident. They showed Rita's entire morning, her arriving late, spilling coffee on her keyboard, getting into arguments with 3 other passengers before Pryor even reached her counter. "Look at this pattern," Officer Rodriguez pointed out to the airline's internal investigators. She was escalating all morning. There were at least 4 red flags that supervisors should have noticed. The Department of Homeland Security had sent 2 representatives to the airport. Destroying a passport wasn't just bad customer service, it was a federal offense. Agent Thompson and Agent Lee sat in a small interview room with Rita, who looked nothing like the angry woman from the morning's video. "I don't know what came over me," Rita whispered, tissues piled up on the table in front of her. 23 years in customer service, and I just couldn't take one more thing going wrong." Her union representative sat quietly beside her, knowing this would be a difficult case to defend. Meanwhile, the airline's aid department had made an interesting discovery. The computer system crashes that had frustrated Rita all morning weren't random. A software update pushed out overnight had created a glitch in the check-in system. Every time Rita had tried to process a passenger with an international connection, the system had frozen. She should have called it support, the tech supervisor explained to the investigation team. "We could have fixed it in minutes, but she never reported the problem." They found dozens of angry keystrokes and force quit commands in the system logs instead. The Human Resources Department had brought in Dr. Patel, a workplace stress consultant, to review the incident. "This is a clear case of burnout," she explained to the airline executives. "Your frontline staff are dealing with increasingly complex situations without adequate support systems." Social media continued to fuel the investigation. Passengers from previous weeks began posting their own interactions with Rita. Most were routine, but a few showed similar signs of stress and hostility. One passenger had even emailed customer service last week, warning that Rita seemed to be at her breaking point. Why didn't anyone act on these warnings? CEO Patel demanded, holding up a stack of printed complaints. The customer service manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They had been short-staffed, he explained. Training budgets had been cut. The morning supervisor had called in sick, and they hadn't found a replacement. Back at the check-in counter, investigators noticed something else. Rita's terminal was the only one without a working stress relief button. A recent addition that let agents quietly signal when they needed a break or support. The maintenance request to fix it had been sitting in the system for 3 weeks. The airline's legal team was working overtime, reviewing similar incidents across the industry. They'd found 23 cases of airline staff damaging or confiscating passenger documents in the past 5 years. None had gone viral like this, but the pattern was clear: increasing stress, inadequate support, and devastating consequences. By late afternoon, the investigation had spread to other airports. Internal auditors were checking every international check-in counter in the airline's network. They found similar issues everywhere: broken equipment, understaffing, outdated training materials, and overwhelmed employees. This isn't just about one passport or one employee, Dr. Patel told the executive team. This is a systemic problem that was waiting to explode. She laid out a comprehensive plan for change: better support systems, mandatory break periods, regular stress assessments, and improved training. The union representatives had their own demands. They wanted better staffing ratios, updated equipment, and clear protocols for handling difficult situations. "Our members are dealing with more pressure than ever," the union president explained. "We need real solutions, not just damage control." As evening approached, CEO Patel called for a final briefing. The investigation had revealed more than just the morning's incident. It had exposed cracks in the entire system. "We're not just going to fix this," he announced to his team. "We're going to transform how we handle our frontline operations." In the security office, Officer Rodriguez was finishing his report when a call came in from Singapore Immigration. They wanted copies of all security footage and documentation. Pryor's case had sparked an international discussion about document handling procedures. The day's investigation had turned a viral moment into a catalyst for change. As the sun set over the airport, new signs were being posted at every counter. "Your documents are your journey. We respect them, and you." It was a small start to what would become a much bigger transformation in how airlines treated their passengers and their staff. 2 weeks after the passport incident, Pryor sat in the office of attorney Mai Wam, watching her sister's wedding video on her phone. She had made it to the ceremony just in time, thanks to the airline's emergency intervention, but the story was far from over. Her inbox was flooded with messages from people who had seen the viral video, including 5 different law firms offering to represent her. "This isn't just about a torn passport anymore," Attorney Wong explained, spreading documents across her desk. "This is about accountability in the airline industry." She had handled cases against airlines before, but none had captured public attention quite like this one. The morning news played quietly on a screen in the corner of the office, showing yet another replay of the incident. The video had now been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. News channels had given it a dramatic title: Passport Gate, the tear that shook air travel. "Look at these messages," Pryor said, showing attorney Wong her phone. Hundreds of people had shared similar stories of mistreatment by airline staff. One grandmother had been stranded for 3 days after an agent wrongly claimed her visa was fake. A student had missed his graduation when his ID was incorrectly confiscated. Down the hall, in a larger conference room, a team of legal assistants was building the case. They had created a timeline wall, mapping out every minute of that fateful morning. Yellow sticky notes marked witness statements, blue ones for security footage timestamps, and pink ones for social media evidence. "The airline wants to settle," Attorney Wong revealed, holding up a letter with the company's logo. "They're offering compensation, but they want to keep the details private." She paused, studying Pryor's reaction. "But that's not what this is about, is it?" Pryor thought about the messages she received, the stories of others who had faced similar situations but lacked video evidence or public support. "No," she said firmly. "This needs to be public. Things need to change." Meanwhile, Rita had hired her own attorney, Mr. Tanaka, a specialist in employment law. They sat in his modest office, reviewing her 23 years of service records. "Your work history was spotless until that day," he noted, flipping through performance reviews. "We need to show that this was an isolated incident caused by systemic failures." The union had thrown its support behind Rita, but with a careful approach. "We condemn the action, but we must address the conditions that led to it," their statement read. They had launched their own investigation into workplace stress among airline staff. Back in Attorney Wong's office, the legal team was deposing witnesses. Ming, the college student who recorded the video, described the scene in detail. Mrs. Patel recalled her conversations with the embassy. Officer Rodriguez shared his security footage analysis. "Each witness adds another layer," Attorney Wong explained to Pryor. "We're not just proving what happened, we're showing why it can never happen again." She pointed to a draft of their proposed industry reforms, new training requirements, stress management protocols, and clear guidelines for document handling. The airline's legal team had set up a war room in their corporate headquarters. They knew this case could set precedents for the entire industry. Their chief counsel, Ms. Rivera, had been working around the clock, reviewing similar cases from around the world. If this goes to court, Ms. Rivera warned the airline executives, it won't just be about damages. We'll have to defend our entire operating procedure. The stock price had stabilized, but shareholders were demanding answers. Public interest in the case kept growing. A documentary filmmaker had reached out, wanting to explore the broader implications for international travel. Aviation blogs were running detailed analyses of document handling procedures. Law schools were already planning to use the case in their corporate responsibility courses. Rita's story had taken its own turn. She had begun therapy, trying to understand her actions that day. Her therapist, Dr. Chen, helped her see how small frustrations had snowballed into a breaking point. "You're not just a villain in a viral video," he reminded her. "You're a human who made a serious mistake." The courthouse became a daily meeting point for different players in the drama. Legal assistants rushed through security with boxes of documents. Journalists camped out hoping for comments. Aviation experts arrived to give depositions about industry standards. Pryor's cousin Anjali, the lawyer from New York, had flown in to assist with the case. "This isn't just legal proceedings," she told Pryor over coffee. "This is about dignity in how people are treated." One torn passport revealed cracks in the entire system. The case had begun attracting international attention. Airlines in other countries started reviewing their own procedures. The International Air Transport Association announced plans for a global summit on passenger document handling. Attorney Wong's office wall now featured a world map with pins showing where the story had made headlines. "Your experience has become a catalyst," she told Pryor. "Sometimes it takes one clear example to expose problems everyone knew existed but nobody addressed." As they prepared for another day of depositions, Pryor received a message from her sister Deepa in Singapore. "Remember when we thought the worst thing that could happen was you missing my wedding?" she wrote. "Now look, you're changing how airlines treat people worldwide." The legal battle was far from over, but its impact was already clear. Every torn edge of that passport had exposed tears in a system that needed repair. As Attorney Wong often said, some cases are about compensation. This one is about transformation. 1 month after the passport incident, Rita sat in her small apartment, staring at her computer screen. Her inbox contained 147 unread emails, most from former colleagues offering support or sharing their own stories of workplace stress. Her employment at International Airways had officially ended yesterday, marked by a brief meeting with HR and a box of belongings from her desk. The morning news played in the background, where aviation experts were discussing the industry-wide changes sparked by what they now called the passport incident. Rita's actions had become a case study in airline training programs across the world, though most didn't know she was the person behind it. "Mom," her daughter Lily called from the kitchen. "Your interview confirmation just arrived." Rita had applied for a position as a customer service trainer at a retail company. She planned to use her experience, both good and bad, to teach others about handling stress and difficult situations. Meanwhile, at International Airways headquarters, the changes were already visible. The newly appointed Chief of Customer Experience, Dr. Amara Singh, was leading a complete overhaul of frontline operations. "We're not just changing rules," she explained to a room full of staff. "We're changing our entire culture." The training center had been transformed. New employees now spent their first week learning about stress management and emotional intelligence. The old training videos had been replaced with real-world scenarios, including a carefully edited version of the passport incident. "Watch how the situation escalates," the trainer pointed out to a class of new hires. "Where could someone have intervened? What support systems should have been in place?" The room fell silent as they watched the crucial moment when frustration turned into a career-ending decision. Back at the airport, counter number 7 had become something of a legend. The new supervisor, Mr. Lee, had turned it into an example of excellent customer service. A small plaque now hung behind the counter. "Every document tells a story. handle with care. The changes weren't just cosmetic. Every counter now had a working panic button for staff to call for immediate support. Supervisors carried tablets showing real-time stress indicators for their team. Regular breaks were mandatory, not optional. Remember when we had to fight for a 10-minute coffee break? One veteran agent remarked to another. Now they'd practically march us off the counter every 2 hours. The change in workplace culture was dramatic, and other airlines were taking notice. Rita's former union representative, Mrs. Patel, had been invited to speak at an international aviation conference. "We knew these problems existed," she told the audience. It took one viral video to make everyone listen. Her presentation on preventing workplace burnout received a standing ovation. In the airport's new relaxation room, a space that didn't exist before the incident, customer service agents could take breaks in massage chairs or speak with on-call counselors. The room's wall featured a quote, "Your mental health matters as much as our passengers' journeys." The industry's response had gone global. Airlines in Asia introduced mandatory cooling-off periods for stressed staff. European carriers developed new protocols for document disputes. Australian Airlines created passenger advocacy offices at major airports. Dr. Singh's team had developed a traffic light system for monitoring staff wellness. Green meant all was well, yellow indicated stress, and red meant immediate intervention was needed. "We could have prevented that passport incident if we'd had these tools," she explained to the board of directors. Rita's story had become part of a larger conversation about workplace mental health. Her therapist, Dr. Chen, had been asked to write a paper about burnout in customer service roles. Behind every viral moment of someone snapping at work, he wrote, there's usually a long story of unaddressed stress. The airline industry's professional organizations had taken notice. The International Air Transport Association created new guidelines for document handling. The Airport Services Quality Board developed stress management standards. Even the Federal Aviation Administration was reviewing its policies. At a customer service seminar in Chicago, Rita made her first public appearance, not as the person from the video, but as a speaker on workplace stress. "I made a terrible mistake," she told the audience. "But if sharing my story helps prevent others from reaching that breaking point, maybe some good can come from it." The changes reached beyond airlines. Other industries began examining their own customer service practices. Retail chains, hotels, and call centers started implementing similar support systems for their staff. Rita's moment of weakness had sparked a revolution in how companies viewed employee mental health. In the airport's training center, new employees now participated in virtual reality simulations of difficult situations. They learned to recognize their own stress signals and practice calming techniques. The old customer is always right mantra had been replaced with respect goes both ways. Mr. Lee gathered his team for their morning briefing. "Remember," he said, holding up a passport, "this isn't just a document. It's someone's ability to attend their daughter's graduation, visit a sick parent, or start a new life. We're not just checking papers, we're protecting dreams." The security office had created a new position, Customer Service Intervention Specialist. Officer Rodriguez, who had handled the original incident, now trained others to spot signs of escalating tension before they reached critical levels. As Rita prepared for her job interview, she looked at a small note her daughter had left on her laptop. "You made a mistake, but you're helping change things for the better." The past month had taught her that sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most important improvements. The airline industry would never be the same after the passport incident. What began as one person's worst day at work had evolved into a movement for better working conditions, improved mental health support, and more humane customer service practices. As Dr. Singh often said in her presentations, sometimes it takes a moment of darkness to show us where we need to shine more light. 1 year after the passport incident, Priya stood at the same airport counter where her travel nightmare had begun. The space had been transformed. Gone was the stark, institutional feel, replaced by a welcoming atmosphere with clear signage and comfortable waiting areas. She was there to film the final segment of a documentary about how one torn passport had changed the airline industry forever. "It's strange being back here," she told the documentary crew, running her hand along counter number 7's smooth surface. The famous sticky note about being kind to passengers had been replaced with a professional plaque outlining passenger rights and staff responsibilities. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the most unexpected ways. The airline had settled the lawsuit 6 months ago, but the terms went far beyond monetary compensation. The agreement included industry-wide reforms, new training programs, and a passenger advocacy office at every major airport. Praya had insisted that part of the settlement fund go toward establishing a mental health support system for airline workers. "Your case changed everything," Attorney Wong said, joining Praya for the documentary interview. She pulled out her tablet, showing statistics from the past year. Customer service complaints down by 40%, staff turnover reduced by half, and 0 incidents of document destruction across all major airlines. The most surprising development had come from Rita herself. After months of therapy and reflection, she had transformed her experience into something positive. Now working as a consultant for a workplace wellness company, she traveled the country speaking about burnout prevention and mental health awareness. "I hit rock bottom that day," Rita explained in her segment of the documentary. She sat in her new office, surrounded by certificates from mental health training programs. "But hitting bottom showed me how many others were struggling too. Now I help companies spot the warning signs before things go wrong." The airline's CEO, Mr. Patel, had embraced the changes wholeheartedly. The company's new training center featured a wall-sized mural showing the evolution of customer service in aviation. "The passport incident was our wake-up call," he told the camera. "Sometimes you need a shock to see what needs fixing." Ming, the student who recorded the viral video, had turned the experience into his college thesis. Social media as a catalyst for corporate change had earned him top honors and a job offer from a major tech company. He still kept in touch with Praya, sending her updates about how their viral moment was being taught in business schools. The airport itself had become a model for others worldwide. The new Passenger Care Center offered support for travelers facing documentation issues. Mrs. Patel, the lady who had helped Praya call the embassy, now worked there part-time, using her experience to help others in similar situations. "Watch this," Officer Rodriguez said proudly, demonstrating the new crisis prevention system. Red lights quietly alerted supervisors when an employee's stress levels rose too high. Break rooms were always staffed. Support teams could reach any counter within 2 minutes. Dr. Singh's workplace wellness program had been so successful that other industries were adopting it. Banks, retail chains, and call centers all sent representatives to learn from the airline's experience. "We turned a crisis into an opportunity," she explained. "Now we're showing others how to prevent their own passport incidents." The documentary crew filmed Praya meeting Lisa, the new agent working at counter number 7. "I was in training when they showed us your case," Lisa said. "It completely changed how I view this job. We're not just processing papers, we're helping people reach their important moments." Praya's sister Deepa had flown in from Singapore to be part of the documentary's final scenes. "Remember how worried we were about you missing my wedding?" She laughed, hugging Praya. "Now look, you've helped make travel better for millions of people." The airline industry's professional culture had shifted dramatically. Customer service awards now included categories for stress management and employee support. The annual aviation conference had made mental health a permanent topic. Rita's story was required reading in training programs. "Here's something interesting," the documentary director said, showing Praya some footage. All across social media, people were sharing stories of airline staff going above and beyond to help with documentation issues. The hashtag #PassportKindness had replaced #PassportAustralia. The court-mandated changes had exceeded everyone's expectations. The airline's stock price had recovered and then some, as investors recognized the value of preventing costly incidents. Other companies started proactively implementing similar reforms, not waiting for their own viral moments. Rita and Praya had never met in person after the incident, but they had exchanged messages through their attorneys. "Your mistake taught me about forgiveness," Praya had written. "Your response taught me about growth." Rita's reply was simple: "Your grace gave me a chance to make things right." As the documentary crew filmed the final scene, Praya handed her passport to Lisa for a symbolic check-in. The document was new. Her old one, though eventually replaced, was now in a display case at the Aviation Museum, a reminder of how one moment can spark lasting change. Sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best changes, Pryor reflected, smiling at the camera. One torn passport showed us tears in the system, but it also showed us how to fix them, how to be better, and how to turn a moment of darkness into a legacy of light. The documentary ended with a montage of positive changes: happy travelers, supported staff, new training programs, and improved facilities. But perhaps the most powerful shot was the simplest: a passport being handled with care at counter number 7, a small act that now carried so much meaning.